Hello, boys and girls. It's Mrs. Pecora back to read you the next chapter in our book, Prince Puggly of Spud and the Kingdom of Spiff. And today we are going to read chapter 6. So sit back, relax, and enjoy chapter 6, A Simple Hello. On Saturday night at the Palace of Spiff, the scene on the crest of that glittering cliff was as Puggly imagined, all lit from below, with the turrets like 12 giant candles aglow. From a distance the palace was shining and still, like a sentinel quietly waiting until the first of the guests would begin to arrive, as their horses and carriages came up the drive. If you went closer, there was action and sound, servants and butlers who bounded around to the delicate clinking of saucers and forks and the fizzle and popping of bottles and corks. At last the final arrangements were made. From every elegant table was daintily laid. The moat had been skimmed, the lawn had been raked, the fancy hors d'oeuvres were all perfectly baked. With one final clip, the hedges were pruned. King Dandy was pleased. He practically swooned. "I'm a genius," he squealed with a clap of his hands. "It's the prettiest palace in all of the lands. It's a towering triumph of stylish design, but now what to do with that daughter of mine?" Indeed, the one thing that marred the decor was the princess's pillows still piled on the floor. They were smack in the middle of Frolicsome Hall, with Franny on top, as I'm sure you recall. For the king of the Spiffs, the problem was thus: if he asked her to move, would she kick up a fuss? How was it, he wondered, she was even there, on top of those pillows way up in the air? What was she doing? Wasn't she bored? He had locked up the books she so clearly adored. They were deep in his dungeon, where they'd never be found, so why was his daughter still lounging around? "Francesca, my precious, my sweetie," he said, "shouldn't those pillows belong on a bed? They're really such an embarrassing sight, and you know very well it's our kingdom's big night." "Indeed," she replied, "but I think that I'll stay. I like it up here. It's comfy, okay?" "Now wait," said the king. "You must understand. We start in 5 minutes. The time is at hand. Francesca von Fopp, you listen to me. Get down from those pillows immediately." For a moment, Francesca ignored the command. She was focused instead on the thing in her hand. At last she said, "Sorry, you were speaking to me? I was rather engrossed in my Dickens, you see." As she said it, she knew she had made a mistake, the worst kind of flub she could possibly make. She had kept the book secret, at least until now. It was something her father would never allow. "Dickens!" he cried. "And you're rather engrossed? You say it so brightly it sounds like a boast. If there's Dickens up there, and there better be not, I demand as the king that you show it to me." No," said Francesca with innocent eyes. She batted her lashes in apparent surprise. "Dickens? Oh, Daddy, that's not what I said. What I said was, chickens. I said chicken instead." The king was befuddled, rubbing his chin. He hadn't the foggiest where to begin. "Chickens?" he asked. "That doesn't make sense. Are you having a joke at your father's expense?" "Of course not," said Franny. "You merely misheard. Just now I said chickens. Yes, that was the word. But don't worry, it's common. Happens all the time. Because Dickens and chickens, well, see how they rhyme?" "So it seems," said the king. "But is that really true? You have chickens up there on the pillows with you?" "If that's truly the case, I don't think that it's right. I assure you those chickens aren't invited tonight. They're impossible creatures. They squawk and they flap. Do you really have chickens up there in your lap?" He narrowed his eyes. "If so, let me see. And why aren't they clucking conspicuously?" Francesca turned pale. She was caught in a lie. "Just a second. I'll prove it," was her stammered reply. She folded a pillow up under her arm, so it slightly resembled a bird on the farm. But pillows and chickens are not the same thing, and the effort fell short of convincing the king. Down below, her father was shaking his head. "Do you take me for some sort of ninny?" he said. "That's not a chicken. It's a pillow, you brat. Do you honestly think you could fool me with that?" Well, you did it, he said with a withering look, so I'll have to assume that you're hiding a book. And since you won't lock it away on the shelf, I shall come up there now and get it myself. He spit on his palms, he glowered, he frowned. Then he started to climb up the pillowy mound. Of course, as he did, it started to sway in a floppy and rather precarious way. Wait, cried the princess, you shouldn't, you can't. She could see they were teetering into a slant. Daddy, you're tempting both of our fates. This heap won't support both of our weights. But the king kept on climbing, refusing to stop. He scrambled and clambered, intent on the top. Yet the whole heap was leaning, of course, in defiance of every Newtonian force. Although it was bending, it didn't collapse, as if it were made out of rubber, perhaps. But one thing was certain, it was no longer straight, beset by the king's magisterial weight. Stop! Cried the princess. We're going to fall. We'll go splattering all over Frolicsome Hall. But King Dandy kept climbing, ignoring her pleas. He climbed with his feet, his finger, his knees, until at long last he had scaled to the peak, which somehow supported his kingly physique. Hanging and flailing like a fish on a hook, he pointed and shouted, I knew it, a book! But sadly the king was too eager, too proud, which is probably why he was shouting so loud. So as he yelled book at that moment in time, the sound of the word put an end to his climb. He heard from below the tearing of threads, the fizzle of fabric being ripped into shreds, the splitting of seams, the unravel of yarn. All that King Dandy could say was, oh darn. Then father and daughter, with cushions and all, fell from the rafters of Frolicsome Hall. The landing they landed could have been rough, if not for the mountain of stuffing and fluff. What once was a mountain no more. Its pillows had ruptured all over the floor, thankfully spilling their cottony guts as the king and his daughter came down on their butts. Francesca went thump with an almighty oof. She looked at her father and thought, what a goof. Daddy, she muttered, I think I can say you have quite absolutely ruined my day. She was just getting ready to say something more when a stranger appeared to darken the door. This person strode in with purposeful stride. He held up his nose as he sauntered inside. Musicians were with him. They blew out a tune, first on the trumpet, the other bassoon. When the fanfare subsided, the man took a bow. Fear not, he announced. I am here with you now. You may clap if you like. You are welcome to cheer. The superlative prince among princes is here. Big whoop, said Francesca, still slumped on the floor. After all, it's not like I've met you before. In fact, I am hardly aware you exist. Now let me get back to my Oliver Twist. The gentleman guest was entirely shocked. You mock me, he roared. I should never be mocked. If you knew who I was, you would zip up that lip, for I am Prince Hep of the Kingdom of Hip. To prove it, the prince did a bit of a jig while flipping and fluffing his feathery wig. He showed off his robes, every fold, every pleat, from his cuffs to his cloak to the shoes on his feet. I'm exquisite, he cried, and I'm sure you can see I'm always attired magnificently. Why, even my skivvies under my clothes are rousingly chic, as everyone knows. Ugh, said Franny, I do not need to know. And all you needed to say was a simple hello. Hello, said the prince. Dear girl, are you mad? That just wouldn't do, and I hasten to add, you need trumpets and music on a night like tonight. A simple hello? No, that wouldn't be right. An evening like this, I would humbly suggest, is for making an entrance while looking your best. He completed this thought with a bit of a twirl. He spread out his arms and went for a whirl. Take me, for example, so refined, so precise. One simple hello would never suffice. My greatcoat, my epaulets, my pantaloons too, all the latest designs from Miss Ruby LaRue. Francesca replied, Miss Ruby LaWho? When in actual fact she already knew. But this prince of the hip seems like such a big dolt, she couldn't help wanting to give him a jolt. What? The prince yawped. He was utterly shocked. He stood there and swayed like his world had been rocked. Miss Ruby, he said, she's the finest around. This woman's revered, respected, renowned. Surely you've heard of the Ruby Boutique, the vanguard of style, the temple of chic. All my clothes, every marvelous thread, Miss Ruby designs just for me, the prince said. Ho-hum, Franny yawned. Do you think I'm impressed? There's more to a person than how they are dressed. When she said this, it seemed like the universe stopped. It felt like the temperature suddenly dropped. The whole of the palace was suddenly hushed. Prince Hep went all red. He was thoroughly flushed. Disgraceful, preposterous, outrageous, he spat. How dare you say something as silly as that? There is nothing more grand than the clothes on your back, but grandness quite clearly is something you lack. You've no sense of fashion. Why, look at you there. That looks like an outfit a monkey would wear. Those pajamas, those slippers. You look like a wench. Did you wear that all day? Just imagine the stench. Now wait, said the king, who of course was nearby. As the princess's father, I cannot deny that my daughter's pajamas are eccentric at best, and frankly, let's face it, she's a bit underdressed. But I cannot abide you disparaging her. It's rude and uncouth, and I won't stand for it, sir. She may be a schlub and a book lover too, but you can't call her smelly. That just isn't true. The prince turned his face to Francesca, and then he slowly looked back at King Dandy again. You're one to talk, said Prince Hemp with a sneer. Like father, like daughter, that much is clear. Have you looked at yourself? Your robes are in rags. They look like shredded up grocery bags. Slowly, King Dandy looked down at his clothes. The moment he saw them, he suddenly froze. It was true. They were torn. Prince Hemp was correct, and not merely ripped. His robes had been wrecked. His trousers, his cape, his silken chemise, they were torn into shreds. They were grated like cheese. Because all his clothing had fitted so well, there was nearly no room for the fabric to swell. When King Dandy had climbed up those pillows before, and then when he tumbled back down to the floor, every seam on his body, every single last one, had burst, or at least had come partly undone. So his clothes hung in tatters, ragged and thin. He looked like a lizard half molting its skin. It was clear from the terrified look on his face, for the very first time he was feeling disgrace. He had lost all his confidence, lost all his pomp. He resembled a creature dredged up from a swamp. He took a step backward in fear and retreat, not seeing those pillows piled up at his feet. So, of course, when he hit them, he stumbled and tripped. He went tottering backward. He skittered and skipped. He kicked up the stuffing that covered the floor and went floundering through it right out the door. Meanwhile, Prince Hep was wearing a smile, but it wasn't a pleasant one, not by a mile. It was more of an arrogant, cynical smirk, confirming the prince was a bit of a jerk. In fact, he was worse than a jerk or a goof, and when he spoke next, he offered the proof. Pajamas, he laughed. That's the best you can do. No wonder your father's embarrassed with you. You're not any princess. You're more of a frump. The whole of that outfit belongs in a dump. Hearing Prince Hep as he vented his spleen, Francesca felt awful, not fit to be seen. She felt like a bug or a bump on a log. She felt like a wart on the back of a frog. She thought to herself, what can I do? What if he's right? What if it's true? Could that happen for real? Could it actually be? Could my father, the king, be embarrassed with me? Maybe you're right, she said with a sigh. Then she covered her face and she started to cry. Her Dickens, her book, slipped out of her lap and fell to the floor with an audible slap. Franny, by now, was so deeply despaired, she left it and ran. She no longer cared. She ran past the king, who was sprawled in a heap, lying there groggy and mostly asleep. Yet just at that moment, King Dandy awoke, when his daughter ran over the shreds of his cloak. Francesca! He hollered, but he was too late. His daughter had already run for the gate. All right, boys and girls, we're going to stop there, so stay tuned for tomorrow and the next chapter of our book. Have a great day.